The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk, the Bronx's flagship television talk show. Please weigh in with your questions or comments by calling 718-960-7241, or you can email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Well, there's been plenty of dialogue recently about the number of charter schools in the city and in the state. Some swear to them as the future of education, and others not so enthusiastic. In fact, they're concerned that charter schools are the wrong direction for New York's school system, and that's what we'll discuss tonight, charter schools. Please join me in welcoming the Policy Director of the New York City Charter School Center, Michael Regnier. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And also from the Department of Middle and High School Education at Lehman College, Dr. Jessica Schiller. Good evening. Thank you for joining us as well. Let's start with you, Mr. Regnier. Lay out the case for charter schools. Why do you and the people that you work with every day say, you know what, we have to have them, we have to have more of them, and we think it's the way to go?
Right. Well, we do think it's the way to go. I'm not sure I would use the phrase you just used, which is the future of education, but I think charter schools are part of the future of education. Charter schools are public schools. They're independently run. They're funded with tax dollars. They don't have any kind of special requirements for admission. Anyone can go to a charter school. If there are too many applicants, they hold a random lottery. So these are very much public schools rooted in New York City neighborhoods. And what we've seen over the last 10 years when New York has had a charter schools law is real success. We've seen test scores rising. We've seen parents being happy. This year, tens of thousands of parents were turned away from those admissions lotteries that I mentioned. There's real community demand for charter schools because they have more flexibility, and in exchange for that, they're on these charters, which is what we call their performance contracts. So it's autonomy in exchange for accountability. We think it's a good deal for children, for families.
Do you think that parents are enthusiastic about charter schools and would like to have their children in there, as much because they know that this is an answer as they are desperate because the schools that their children might otherwise attend are substandard, and they're like, you know what, I got to get out of here, and if that's the answer, I don't care what it is, but it seems to be better than what I might, have remanded my kid to otherwise.
Well, I think the charter families who I've met have been enthusiastic about the charter schools that they're in. They feel like their children go every day to a class that has a culture of learning, focus. In many cases, charter schools have a longer school day and a longer school year. So especially if you've had a rough start to your academic career and maybe you're a few years behind grade level, a charter school's an opportunity, and you're right, though, in many communities there are public schools that are failing. We've got to fix those schools. But I think part of the answer for the whole system is to create options and to have some innovation. Charters provide that.
I have a number of questions about what you said, but let's bring Dr. Schiller into the conversation. So tell me a little bit about your perspective as an educator. Are charter schools, are they working? Are they what we need to do more of? What's your thought about charter schools?
Well, the jury's still out on whether they're working or not, and that's one of my main concerns about the proliferation of charters, especially in poor urban neighborhoods, is that there's no conclusive data that they're better or worse than public schools. So that's one main problem, that we have lots and lots of energy and money around an initiative that has no real data to show that it does have success, and I'm talking nationally. The second problem is that there's really no fiscal accountability for charter schools. So we've got lots of charter operators using money for all kinds of things. In Ohio, for example, there was a third-party operator called White Hat that was caught embezzling funds from from the government that they got to run their schools. Victory Schools up in Albany is another example where there is mismanagement of funds. So, there are lots of problems. Along with the potential innovation, we don't really have a system of accountability to go along with that.
Yeah, I'm sure Mr. Regnier has some data that he would like to throw out here. I'm going to throw out one thing, the study that Stanford had done, which I'm sure you're both familiar with, and I'll just throw out some general numbers. And, the whole, we've discussed this on this show over and over again, the whole idea of evaluating how education is doing is a whole industry in and of itself. But in plain language, the Stanford study said 17% of charter schools reported gains, academic gains that were better than public schools. 37% showed gains that were worse than traditional public schools, and 46% showed no difference, that they were equal. So I've thrown that out there. I'm sure you and your colleagues have data that supports charter schools.
Well, it's important to distinguish between the geographical areas that are in play here. So Professor Schiller mentioned the national charter school landscape. And it's true, there are mixed results. There are states such as Ohio, which you mentioned, where accountability is much weaker than it is here in New York. New York has really been a leader in making sure that the charter schools that open are quality charter schools, and if they don't perform, then they get shut down, as a couple of them were just this year. As far as achievement goes, it's important, again, to look to New York. So the same methodology that was used by Dr. Raymond and her colleagues at Stanford to find that there were mixed results in charter schools nationally, also found that charter schools citywide are outperforming in reading and in math the traditional public schools. It's not the case in every single school that it's a statistically significant difference in both subjects, but the trend is such that Dr. Raymond penned an op-ed in the Los Angeles Times a few months back saying, folks, nationally, if you're interested in how to run a charter school system well, how to set up charter schools in a way that works for kids, look to New York State.
Well, so why do you say that the data is not there? We certainly would be most concerned about New York City, and I'm going to follow up once you respond about just in general about this data, but why don't you just weigh in on that idea, since you had established that, or you contend that data is not showing that they're better.
Well, I think it's true that we see some of the better performing charter schools here in New York, although that's not true across the board. I think that the problem is really, let's just take, for example, the Harlem Success Academies, which are in Harlem, and there are several of them run by former city councilwoman Ava Moskowitz. She has gotten lots and lots of extra support for those schools that regular public schools in that district and in the buildings that Harlem Success shares with her schools did not get. That help included
financial support.
Not just financial support, but also aid from the City Department of Education to secure more classroom space for her schools and other kind of facilities, resources for those schools, which is going to help those schools
so your
perform
suggestion
better.
would be then, if you provided similar kinds of supports for traditional public schools, maybe they might do better as well.
Yeah.
So then the answer may not be in the nature of the charter school being a specialized school, or with the other rules or other freedoms that they might have.
Well, there's a couple things here. First of all, it's important that everyone realize that charter schools don't receive any facilities funding under the law in New York State. So they have to carve it out of their operating budgets, or they have to find a nonprofit organization to help them start who has a building sitting around. Or they have to go to the New York City Department of Education and see if at the Chancellor's discretion they can have room in an underutilized building, a building that hasn't been used fully to capacity as the district defines it. So I don't think it's extra resources for charter schools to have a building. It's a public school. A public school needs a building.
This whole notion of space is an interesting one, especially here in the Bronx, because the Bronx Borough President had a very, I thought, interesting perspective. I had never heard this till I had heard it at his State of the Borough address, and that was that if a charter school shares a building with a public school, as many of them, a traditional public school, they're all public schools, we realize that, with the traditional public schools, and his contention is that the charter school ought to be more benevolent with some of the resources that it gets, and since they have to share many facilities, balance some of that off and help the traditional public school as well. Do you support that notion? To me, it was an innovative thought. I'm curious, certainly, what the charter school movement thinks about that.
Well, I know that legislators in Albany who are more in favor of and more against charter schools are discussing this issue right now, and I'm sure that they're going to come to some sort of agreement. I think we're all in favor of equity, and we want to make sure that that happens citywide. But, you know, even within the traditional public schools, you see many examples of rich school, poor school, or crowded school, less crowded school. And it's important that we look across the system. Across the system, charter schools, many of them are in very crowded buildings. Many of them are uncertain as to what building they might have the next year as they continue to grow out to their planned level of service. So charter schools are definitely supportive of making sure that all buildings are working for the kids who are in there.
Would you support it, or do you think your organization might ultimately come around to supporting a proposal like that?
I think that that schools need to be working for the kids that are in there. If there are any kind of glaring disparities in either direction, I think that the school leaders need to work together and the district needs to work together to fix that.
You know, another notion, and this comes up with the idea of the students that they serve, and, you know, if we're trying to evaluate which is which, charter schools, and this is a negotiating point right now with the teachers union and even on a national scale, the idea that charter schools do not take special ed students and English English as a second language, English language learners. You know, and again, is that something that you see as well? It's a negotiating point. We might say, well, maybe our statistics would be more balanced and better able to, you know, even up to really make a determination if we were forced to take these students who are a little more difficult to deal with.
Well, the research that has been done on this, to the extent that it's possible, the researchers have set that aside and controlled for demographic details like that, and found that the sometimes very dramatic differences still hold up between charter schools and traditional public schools. But on the subject of special education and English language learners, charter schools are public. They need to be public. They need to serve everybody. That means for a charter school, because it's a school that parents have to choose, that means attracting parents to their schools and being able to deliver a good service to them. There are some areas in the law where charter schools have been hamstrung in those efforts. And I think that's also going to be something that the legislature is going to be looking to address. For example, it's been difficult for many charter schools that want to put in a preference for, let's say, Spanish speakers into their charter, into their deal with the authorizer. They want to have that preference in the enrollment process. That hasn't been strictly legal under the law. We want to put that explicitly in the law.
You can't do that in a public school.
We want to change that.
Dr. Schiller, is there something that would make you feel better about charter schools? In other words, given the difficulty in evaluating academic performance and measuring them and really comparing them, is there a study out there or something you'd like to see that make you say, you know what they're saying is right, and now I'm going to get behind the movement?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think that we need some real fiscal accountability around them more than anything at the moment. And then, as also you mentioned, charter schools, there is data that shows that, you know, charter schools are working with less special ed students and English language learners. And it's not really just on the admissions end. In fact, the admissions end is not the real problem when it comes to students that the charters serve. Special ed students and English language learners, or students that are not performing well on exams, are counseled out of those schools. They're counseled out of lots of schools, traditional public schools as well, but charters are doing this particularly, and that's a real problem when the charters themselves don't see themselves as serving the public.
In other words, they are trying to serve, I hate to use this word, but an exclusive part of the public.
Or niche markets.
A niche market. Your thought on that?
Counseling out students, telling them you can't be here, you can't take your spot.
Or you might be better off somewhere else.
Is against the law. If anybody has information about that going on, they need to contact the Department of Education, contact the state. I haven't seen any evidence that that's happened. There are rumors. If it is going on, we need to correct it. But this idea that it's sort of an established practice and an established fact just isn't true. We have great charter schools that are serving special ed, serving English language learners. And the real question, I think, is whether they're serving them well. So we've had a huge problem in New York City of special education students achieving that designation because the system was failing them, especially in some of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods of New York. We don't need to just be asking how many students are designated as special education, but how many of them are designated that in the first place, and then how well are they being served? That's the important question.
Let's go to the telephone. Bob from Riverdale is with us. I saw him the other day. He says, I'm going to call into your show this week. Hi, Bob. How are you?
How are you, Gary?
Good.
I've done some research over the past couple of days, as you know, and it seems that President Obama has been very gung-ho about charter schools.
No question about it.
Until he saw that some charter schools are becoming segregated schools nationwide.
Segregated and ethnically segregated.
Yes. Now, I want to go back, though, to what Mr. Reisner said about charter schools having to find space on their own. And you know, Gary, that I wrote what I'm going to say in my column in the Bronx News. But how can a high-ranking New York City Department of Education consultant be on the board of a charter school group that was going to get New York City public school space until the fact, along with the founders' legal problems, were known to the Department of Education? How could a Department of Education consultant be on a charter school board of board?
So I understand what you're saying. I don't know that we need to break down that in particular incident, but this idea of conflict of interest is out there, and so let's address. Thank you very much for that comment. The movement is becoming not just a nice idea, but it's become a political football, and these kinds of things happen. Does that kind of thing concern you, for instance?
It does, and I think that's why charter school proponents, including the New York City Charter School Center, have supported the state bill that passed in the state Senate, which would put charter schools under the conflict of interest provisions of the regular law. We would, I think, we recognize that that's an area where, at the very least, some charter schools have been prone to criticism. They haven't. They made folks wonder, and there's no reason to wonder. Sunshine is a good disinfectant, and conflict of interest rules are there for a reason. So I think that's going to be handled, hopefully, if our leaders act.
And do you have thoughts on that particular issue? Or I mean, his response is he'd like to clean it up. Although I don't hear a charter executive saying, you know what, let's not make that happen.
That's right.
But,
I mean, I'd love to see that too. But we have yet to see it. In fact, what we see is quite the opposite. We have folks who are operating nonprofits that are really hedge fund managers or Wall Street folks who are funneling large amounts of money into the charter school movement, but have separate nonprofit operations that free them from those conflicts. But really, they have associations with big money, big banks, Wall Street, large foundations like the Walton Foundation.
the Gates Foundation is certainly in
absolutely. So, so I think we need to really come clean and have some accountability and really show the books to the public.
I want to ask this question about teachers, but certainly before we run out of time, because the notion of the local teachers union and the teachers unions across the country. Is there a place for unions and teachers unions in charter schools, or is this apples and oranges?
There certainly is a place, and in New York. But before we get to that, I'd like to just respond quickly.
Sure.
Yeah. Another organization, speaking of unions, that's recently worked with the Walton Foundation is Randy Weingarten's AFT in the Washington, D.C. School District. There are people who have means, who are interested in helping public education. They see the system has failed, especially poor and minority students, generation after generation. they're interested in doing something to break that cycle beyond the same old tropes that we hear year after year, and which those of us, frankly, who are in middle-class zones or districts or towns can sort of debate at our leisure, because there isn't that urgency to get our kid into a good school and get them into college and into a better life.
So your point is that, I'll let you respond.
Yeah.
Your point is that, and I liked what you had said. I thought it was very interesting what you had said, that it's a way of doing it in a non-traditional way rather than pour money into a system that hasn't worked.
I've never heard a charter school parent ask me what a hedge fund is or who's behind this. They want opportunities for their kids.
Dr. Schiller, your response to that?
No, but my response to this is I wonder why folks with means aren't providing jobs. Kids will graduate from high schools in the Bronx, for example, this June, without a lot of opportunity for jobs and even college tuition.
So your concern, I mean, of course, we can't debate where a philanthropist wants to put their money, but your concern is that it sounds like to me, why are they so interested in charter schools? That was one of the things that my research
I've been
told
curious about that.
I think I can't. Unfortunately, I'm not a person of great means myself, so I can't speak to individuals' motivations. But I've seen people spend a lot of time, in addition to money, to try to figure out what they can do to make the system work for everybody.
Well, I want to go back to this teachers union thing, because everybody reads about
Yes.
it in the paper, and we know what's out there about teachers unions. Is there a place for teachers unions, and if so, what would need to take place for you in the charter school movement to say, hey, we like teachers unions and we'll endorse a contract or sign a contract with the unions?
Well, the way that charter schools work is each school decides whether it's going to sign a contract with the union. We have unionized, we have very actually pro-union charter schools. The UFT itself, the New York City Union, runs its own charter school, which actually was one of the ones that ran into some problems with the conflict of interest and the open meetings laws. There are charter schools that have very proudly pro-union teachers. I think it's a great choice. What matters is at the end of the day student achievement, and I think New York is a very union town. Unions have done a lot historically to protect teachers. They're going to keep doing that. Charter schools right now are looking to raise the statewide cap up from 200 schools to 460 schools. This isn't a takeover of any kind of system, but it is a way to help the overall public education system in New York.
Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on unions? We could negotiate. If we could negotiate the deal here, we could solve a whole darn problem. Your thoughts on the idea of unions? Could unions survive in the framework that Mr. Regnier was talking about?
Absolutely, and lots of school staffs have opted to join the UFT or start unions of their own.
Do you think the UFT is being unnecessarily obstinate in opposing the charter school movement, and just really, because right now they are really one of the lines in the sand, and many legislators who are friendly with the UFT will not cross that line?
I understand, and I'm not here defending the UFT, but I do think that they're looking out for their teachers and for labor. I mean, you mentioned earlier that what we really need to worry about is not really teachers, but student achievement. But teachers are working 12-hour days without compensation in some cases. That they would get if they had a union contract, and lots of young teachers who are new to the system.
You're talking about in the charter system or outside?
In the charter system.
Right.
Well, that's true outside as well, but in the charter schools that have long extended days in their charter and extended years, those teachers don't get compensated a lot of times for that extra work and don't know that they can advocate for them on their own behalf.
Mr. Regnier, can the charter school system sustain that? Because, of course, that's how any union begins, when workers band together because they believe that they need to do something better. It's nice to have somebody out of college or just get their degree and want to do something in education, and then they get a nice job, but then other issues come up, whether they be work rule related and otherwise. Can you sustain the workforce you need on the teachers' end without going the direction of a union?
Well, I think teachers want to be professionals, and that's what it comes down to. Our high-achieving charter schools are receiving job applications from regular district school teachers who are in the union system, and turning hundreds of them away. They're coming in at a very high ratio because for every job that's open, a district school teacher realizes that, yeah, this is going to be more work. I'm going to be working with a challenging population who's oftentimes got a couple of strikes against them. But I know that this organization is set up for the purpose of student success. I want to work with peers who have a similar motivation.
And
we're all ready to be accountable together.
To me, it was about sustainability. You think that will last as that person gets older, may need other considerations, or we're going to wait and see?
Well, there's a lot of things we need to work out, but charter schools have been around for 10 years. We're doing pretty well so far. I think we've earned the right to keep after it.
We've put up the website, NewYorkCityCharterSchools.org. If you needed to vote right now to raise the cap, I'm guessing you would say no with a qualification, or are you just saying no to the legislators, turn down raising the cap right now?
I would say no. I think that we need to really examine what we've got before we raise any cap, in spite of the carrot of race to the top, because I think that is a distraction.
We're out of time. I would love to discuss that because that really is a whole other
right.
a whole other issue. Mr. Regnier, is there a compromise on raising the cap? Do you say unlimited, or would you say a certain percentage per year? How would you offer a bill that would work? And we only got about 20 seconds.
I don't think we can afford to scoff at the potential for $700 million at a time when our state's looking at billions of dollars of budget deficits. What our state education department has determined would win maximum points in that competition, as we just get to it at the very end, is a raise up to that number I mentioned of 460. That's still just 10% of the schools in New York when that cap is eventually exhausted, which won't be for years. It's not a big step. It's a common sense reform.
Yeah, we could, that has just opened up another half-hour show. And Dr. Jessica Schiller from Lehman College, thank you so much. Michael Regnier from the New York City Charter School, the Center, New York City
right.
Charter School Center. I want to get that right. Thank you for joining us
My
as well.
pleasure.
And folks, we hope you've given you a chance to learn something about it, and certainly talk to your legislator if you have a feeling one way or the other at this point. And if you do have further comments or questions or anything you heard on the show or anything going on in the Bronx that you want us to address, please send it to us in an email at BronxTalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future program. Archives of our program available at blip.tv. Just search for Bronx Talk. Next week, a wonderful show we pre-taped about, get this, Bronx beer, Bronx soda pop, and the merchandising of other Bronx products. One-of-a-kind stuff about our hometown that you can only see right here on Bronx Talk every Monday night at 9, on BronxNet Cablevision Channel 67, Verizon Fios 33. Thanks, of course, to producer Jane Folloro for making it happen. And to you, good night.
Thank you.